through a fictitious example, imagine that for a particular stock, there was an escapement of 100 fish. And I'm looking at the table to the right now. Imagine that fisheries along the West Coast impacted the stock, and we estimate that there was 10 AEQ mortalities occurring in Alaska, 10 in British Columbia, 10 in Washington, 10 in Oregon, and 10 in California. So if we were calculating a total exploitation rate, that is the exploitation rate for all fisheries along the West Coast, we would get 50 AEQ mortalities as a numerator. And then for the denominator, we would get 50 AEQ mortalities added to 100 fish in escapement. This would result in 50 over 150, or a total exploitation rate of 33%. We could similarly calculate an SUS, or Southern U.S. exploitation rate, and that metric would include fishery mortalities only from Washington, Oregon, and California. Basically, a Southern U.S. rate represents anything south of Canada. So it would be 30 AEQ mortalities divided by the total adult population of 150, or in this case, a Southern U.S. exploitation rate of 20%. Next slide, please. So I see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd, and so a lot of you probably have some experience with what a management objective is. However, for folks who are new on the call today, I'm going to use Dungeness Chinook as an example for management objectives. Many stocks have a low abundance threshold, also referred to as an LAT, and as the abundance of the stock changes, so too does the allowable exploitation rate. In the case of Dungeness, the low abundance threshold is 500 fish in escapement. So if the stock abundance is greater than 500 fish in escapement, then fisheries are managed to an exploitation rate limit of 10% in the southern US. However, if that escapement falls below 500 fish, then fisheries must be managed for a critical exploitation rate of 6% in the southern US. This one's a relatively simplistic stock example, with some stocks having multiple tiers of abundance threshold and therefore exploitation rate objectives. Next slide, please. On screen now, you'll see what the Chinook management objectives were for the 2023 preseason planning process. The exploitation rate metric used, as you can see, varies across stocks and at different abundances. However, highlighted in green here is the Stillaguamish River, which has been kind of our primary constraining stock for sport fisheries in Puget Sound for the last 5 years. We've also highlighted a few other stocks that have been occasionally constraining in the last 5 years in blue. Maybe going down the list, Nooksack Springs, Skagit Summer Falls, Skagit Springs, Snohomish, Nisqually, Skokomish, and Midhood Canal. Next slide. So we don't know what the management objectives for Chinook and Coho will be in 2024 because they're dependent upon regional abundance forecasts. That forecast processing is occurring now, and we hope to have management objectives identified in the next month or so. However, we did really want to highlight one trend that we've observed in the past few years for Chinook fisheries, which is that Chinook catches per day that the fishery is open for have really increased in recent years, and particularly when we look at some areas. It's really great to see increasing rates of angler success and participation, but it's likely that many of our Chinook management objectives for 2024 will be similar to those in 2023. And that means that they're going to, if there are similar exploitation rate objectives during fishery planning, and then we would need more impacts to have longer seasons, those greater impacts might not be available. So to demonstrate kind of this issue that we're running into, on screen here, we're going to look at Marine Area 5 in the winter, which Marine Area 5 is situated between CQ River and Lyre River as an example. Next slide. So on screen here, you see until about 2016, there was a trend where Area 5 winter Chinook fisheries would be open for approximately 70 to 85 days. Typically during that period, they'd catch less than 500 Chinook. Last year, the fishery was open for just 10 days and caught over 1,300 Chinook. Where this was historically a pretty small fishery, factors such as angler success, angler participation, and effort shifts from closed areas have really contributed to a much higher modeled impact needed to run some of the same seasons that we might have seen historically. Next slide, please. And even though Area 5 winter is a good example, you can see that here, I believe it's in the green line. There are several other examples where you could see this trend throughout Puget Sound. For example, if we're looking at Area 11 in June, which is represented in red here, you can see how that catch per day pattern. Area 11, just for reference, is the Tacoma area. And we could also look at Area 7 in the summertime. That's this blue line here, which represents the San Juan area. In all three of these fisheries, the impacts that you might need to model a season are very different in recent years than we've seen historically. Next slide, please. So given the limited impacts that we've got available and the recent catch trends, our aim is to really maximize fishing opportunity while meeting conservation objectives. We go through the pre-season planning process, working with the public to consider recreational priorities and examine trade-offs with certain management areas. Typically, this is done via scenario modeling tools for Chinook and Coho in each area. And we host these tools online during public meetings so that the public can work with us to develop fishing scenarios. An example from last year, you can see in the table below where WDFW examined how different changes to Marine Area 5 in the summer would potentially affect predicted Stillaguamish mortalities. I won't walk through what all that scenario modeling process looks like just now, but we will be developing and exploring those scenarios together in future North of Falcon meetings. And if you're interested, please get involved and attend those. With that, I'll be handing the virtual mic to Dr. Kirsten Simonson, who's our Puget Sound Recreational Salmon Manager.
Thanks so much, Derek. I'm going to walk through some of the season recap and some of the key areas from last year. So with that, I'll jump right into it if we can go to the next slide. So the main areas that I'm going to talk about today are Marine Areas 7, 9, and 11. These are the ones that tend to garner the most questions and the most interest, and so just wanted to walk through these. Just to kind of orient everyone first, though, Areas 7 and 9, because of the way that they were, the seasons were run this last year or two with these kind of short week openers that we've had, the data for Chinook fisheries are displayed as a harvest per day. So it's the number of legal marked Chinook that were caught per day that the fishery was open over that time frame. In contrast, coho and pink fisheries are displayed as CPUE, or catch per unit effort. And CPUE is kind of a really typical term that we use in fisheries management, and it basically describes the amount of catch per some unit of effort. And in this case, the unit of effort is basically one angler on a trip per day. So it's basically the number of fish caught per angler on any given day that the fishery is open. And I'll show you what this looks like in a second. So for areas 10 and 11, though, because those were more of a full season, or we tried to make them a full season, all that data is displayed as CPUE. So if we want to go to the next, click forward. So this is kind of what a typical CPUE figure looks like here. And just to kind of orient you a little bit to what we're looking at here, you can see that on the x-axis here, or the horizontal axis, we have the date that a fishery was open. And then on the y, or the vertical axis, you see the CPUE, and you see there's a range of values here, and you can kind of see these numbers jumping around. So we want to click forward. So we can see here that this red line represents the current, which is the 2023 data. So it's usually the year that we're looking at. So this is the current data for CPUE for any given fishery. And then this blue line here is the historic average. And when we say historic average, this is basically the previous 5 years that this fishery has been open. And for a pink fishery, when we're displaying that, it's just the previous odd years. So just the pink years that the fishery was around. And then you can see that this is kind of a smooth trend, and you can kind of see what the red line looks like, and you can see that the blue line kind of mirrors that to some degree, looking at this kind of smooth trend there, and the gray shading around that represents some of the little bit of the uncertainty in that estimate around that smoothing trend for those years. So if we click forward again, you can see that anytime that red line is above the blue line, that's basically representing a catch that's kind of above the historical average. And if we click forward again, anything that's below that line is a catch that's typically below average. So that's just to kind of orient you as we're moving through these next couple of slides. You're going to see the same type of figure over and over again. So I just wanted to kind of walk through it slowly for those who are not familiar with seeing these. So we can go to the next slide. And we're going to start with Chinook catch in Area 7. So this is the San Juan Islands. Again, I'm showing this by the harvest per day. So you can see the days that the fishery was open here on the x-axis. And you can see that there was really high catch the opening day. And then that catch kind of dropped off to the next weekends that we did have that fishery open. This season was planned for just that one short weekend opener from July 13th through 15th. We took a lot of in-season management actions during this, and we were able to kind of monitor this very closely and able to open it for a couple more days in the following 2 weekends. So it was open on the 21st and then again the 28th and 29th. At that point, we had pretty much reached our harvest quota and our sublegal encounters limit. You can see in this table here the fishery controls that existed for this fishery. And you could see that we hit 96% of our harvest quota for this fishery and went just over our sublegal encounters, 106% for this fishery by the time that it closed down on the 29th. Next slide, please. So this is Area 7, both the pink and the coho fisheries. Again, this is that CPUE slide that I just kind of walked through. So we could see that for pink fisheries in Area 7, we had much higher CPUE than we have seen historically. This was a pretty great pink year for anybody who was out there able to take advantage of that. We saw really high catches, really high numbers of pinks in Puget Sound, kind of throughout Puget Sound for this season. And then you can see the graph on the right shows the coho fishery. And again, you can see above average coho CPUE for this fishery in Area 7 during this year. That coho fishery was a mark selected fishery during the time that Chinook fishing was open, or Chinook retention was open. And then it was a mark selected fishery for the month of August. And then that switched to a non-selective fishery for the month of September. And another thing to point out is that based on the number of pinks that we saw moving into Puget Sound this year, we were able to add 2 additional pinks to that Area 7 fishery beginning on August 19th. So next slide, please. We're going to move into Area 9, which is the Admiralty Inlet area. Again, you'll see the Chinook harvest here displayed as a harvest per day. Again, you could see really high numbers for that initial opening weekend and then kind of dropping off after that. Did not drop off quite as precipitously as it did in Area 7, which is kind of consistent with what we saw last year when we had a very similar planned fishery. In 2022, I keep saying last year as if it's still 23, and it is not. I got to remind myself of that. So this fishery was planned again for that July 13th through 31st for Thursdays through Saturdays only. The actual season was those 2 initial 3-day openers, and then we were able to get 2 days out of that third weekend. Did close down 1 day early on the 29th, and that's because we did reach over our harvest quota of 106% that you can see in this table that's here on the bottom. So if we move to the next slide, we'll again and walk through the pink and coho fisheries in Area 9. Again, the pink fishery, you can see that CPUE on the left-hand side. So you can see above average catch, above average CPUE for that fishery throughout the season. And then for coho, again, you could see this kind of ramped up throughout this as the season went on. And we ended up having pretty much above average CPUE for that entire season as well. For coho fisheries, this was mark selective for most of the season while Chinook retention was open and then through the beginning part of September. And it did become non-selective for the end half of September from the 18th through the 30th. And then it closed down after the 30th of September as was planned. So if we move to the next slide, we're going to kind of keep walking our way down through Puget Sound. So this is looking at the Chinook catch in Area 10, which is the Seattle-Bremerton area. This fishery was planned from July 13th through the end of August. We did kind of have some back and forth with this one. I'm sure there'll be some questions on this, which I can definitely answer later on. The actual season lasted from July 13th through the beginning part of August, closed down. We continued to do test fishing in this area and realized that we had a pretty big push of legal marked fish that came in around that same time period. So that dropped our encounter rate. So we were able to open back up again for the weekends of August 11th through 13th. And then from August 18th through 20th again, at which point both our harvest quota and our sublegal encounter rate, our limits for this fishery were reached. So the CPUE figure here looks a little bit funky just because you see those drops, and that was the time frame that this fishery was closed down in those couple weeks of August. So next slide, please. So I'm going to come back to pink in a second, but first I'm going to walk through Area 10 coho. So this is the figure for coho CPUE in Area 10 this summer. And you can see again, well above average CPUE for this fishery, almost 2 fish per angler for a little while there. This is an area that is non-selective for coho. It was open through the end of October. And we did go down to a 1 coho limit in early August just due to high catch totals for this area. And I will kind of come back to this in a little bit. We did manage to get back to a 2 coho limit in September based on kind of looking and assessing this fishery as we went on. And you can see kind of where that CPUE spikes back up again is when it went back to 2 coho in September. So going to the next slide, please. So this is looking at the pink fisheries for both Area 10 and Area 11 now side by side. They were really similar for this year. We had, again, above average CPUE for both of these fisheries. You can see Area 10 on the left and Area 11 on the right. And we did have additional pinks added to this quota as of the beginning part of September on September 8th. And so, yeah, again, this was just kind of very typical of this really big run of pinks that we saw in Puget Sound this year. So moving to the next slide. We're going to walk through the Area 11 Chinook season. This one is one that I did not put the CPUE figure up. It did not make a whole lot of sense based on the kind of short openings that we had for this fishery this year. But we can kind of walk through some of the numbers. So we did have kind of two separate seasons modeled for this for the period of time for June, and then from July basically through when the fishery was planned through at the end of September. And this is basically due to the difference in the stocks that are modeled for in this area at these times. So there's different stock composition based on the modeling that we have and coded wire tag recoveries for the portion of time in June and the portion from July through September. So that's why these are modeled as two separate seasons with two separate quotas. So we could see that the June timeframe, we did go over our unmarked encounters, which was the wild fish. We did go over that encounter limit in early June. So that fishery was open from June 1st through 4th, and then the 8th through the 11th, and then it closed down after June 15th. And then in July, we had a really similar story where we had reached both of our sublegal encounter and our unmarked or wild encounter limits halfway through the fishery as well. So it was open from July 1st to 2nd, and then again from the 6th to the 9th, the 13th and the 14th, and then again closed down on July 15th. So this is one that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a little while. I know there'll probably be some questions about this as well. So promise I'll get to that. So if we want to go to the next slide, please. So this is looking at the Area 11 coho fishery now. So we can look at the CPUE plot for this. Again, you can see those areas of above average CPUE for this fishery for the entire season. So the one thing that I do want to point out here is that the preseason modeling for this fishery did not include Chinook non-retention impacts until September. So that's something that's necessary to have if we do anticipate having a fishery that closes to Chinook early. We have non-retention impacts that are built in. For this fishery, we did not have those until September. And so due to that high impact on wild Chinook, those unmarked Chinook that I showed in the last slide, we were unable to have this fishery open in the marine areas during that planned pink and coho fishery time period in August. And for that reason, we decided to go to a shore-based only, knowing that there's very few Chinook impacts when we have a shore-based only fishery. And then once we had those non-retention impacts back into the fishery, we reopened the marine area on the 1st of September. This is an area where coho is non-selective for this fishery. And again, it was open then from when it reopened in the marine area on the 1st of September, it was open through the end of October. So we want to go to the next slide. So like I said, I wanted to talk through some of these the coho in-season management actions that were taken this year. Usually coho is not a fishery that we intensively manage in season and have fishery controls on, just because coho are not ESA listed like Chinook are. So for that reason, we typically don't take a whole lot of in-season management action on them. However, that's not to say that we don't have to be accountable for the numbers of coho that we are catching in these fisheries. So here I wanted to show a couple of things here. So this is some estimates of the July catches for 3 different fisheries. So we have Area 9, Area 10, and Area 11, all in July. And you could see the numbers that we're looking at here were the preseason predicted numbers for both retained and total encounters. In Area 9, what was the preseason prediction of catch, and the actual estimate was over 350% of the retained and over 260% of the total encounters. For Area 10, that number was over 260% of the retained and over 175% of the total encounters. And Area 11 was again over 170% of the retained fish and then over 100% of the total encounters. So one of the questions that we've gotten as the season went on was, why were there actions that were taken in Area 10 and not in other areas? And so there's really 2 reasons for this. One of them is just the magnitude of the catch that we saw in Area 10. You can see that, yes, it was not, the percentage was not as high as say area 9, but just the sheer number of fish that were caught in this area, it was over 12,000 fish, which was over 8,000 more fish than we anticipated seeing in this fishery. And so that was one of the reasons. The other reason that in-season management actions were taken in this fishery was that there was concerns over certain coho stocks of concern that were limiting for the fisheries this year. And some of those stocks are found in high numbers based on our modeling of codewire tag returns in this area. So based on just the sheer number of fish that were caught and the stocks of concern that we were potentially impacting, we made the decision to go down to that 1 coho limit. And then once we kind of stabilized, we were able to bump it back up to 2 fish limit, 2 coho limit in this area. So, and then we want to go to the next slide. So this is, a kind of a story of looking at coho-directed fisheries and Chinook impacts during these fisheries. So the other thing that I want to point out with some of these is that, it's still important for us to be accounting for catch and release impacts of Chinook during these pink and coho-directed fisheries. So additional intensive monitoring has been implemented since 2020 because of this. So during these coho fisheries, we are doing intensive monitoring to assess any potential Chinook impacts. And this is because any salmon-directed fishery that we have has the potential to impact our conservation goals on some of these key stocks. So that's just kind of a brief overview of what we had going on this past season. And with that, I'm going to kind of move it looking forward. So if we want to go to the next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Mark Baltel, who is our statewide salmon and steelhead manager, and we're going to kind of walk through some of the things we're expecting looking forward in the next season.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. And I realize we've been talking for almost an hour now, and it's a lot of information to digest. I am the last formal speaker this evening, so I'll try to keep my comments brief and on target. I'm going to talk a little bit here about kind of the outlook for 2024. Talk through a little bit about in-season management and the list of agreed fisheries. I'm going to talk through some of our recent year recreational priorities that we've considered as we've implemented seasons this year. I'm going to touch on some trends that we've been seeing in the data with regards to recreational fisheries, particularly directed at Chinook. And then I'm going to just do some high-level talking about some of the trends in the data and some of the other challenges that we have for implementing recreational fisheries. So next slide, Ailey. So folks who are new to the process and thinking ahead, really, it's really hard for us to say we really know what to expect until we get the forecasts for the upcoming year. So as has been mentioned previously in this discussion, those are being worked on currently. We expect to finalize those with our co-managers here by the middle of February and have those out during our forecast presentation early in March. I think it's fair to say that as we're looking at the landscape, Stillaguamish Chinook will continue to restrict marine area fishing opportunities as they have been in the most recent 5 to 6 year period. As Kirsten mentioned and others, it's an even year, so no pink salmon as part of our salmon planning this year. And really just, I think folks should expect that we're going to approach these fisheries with the same kind of level of consideration that we have in the past. We have a recently adopted North of Falcon policy that has gone through the commission process that really provides a guide for us, an additional guide besides all of our conservation and recovery goals. That policy helps guide us in regards to fishing opportunities and how we just try to provide a diverse and balanced suite of those fisheries. Next slide, please. So Kyle talked about it a little earlier. We have this document that we produce at the end of North of Falcon called the List of Agreed Fisheries. It's really a big document that talks through all of the planned fishery dates, and seasons for both the tribal co-managers and the state fisheries from the coast and in Puget Sound and in all the freshwater systems. Within that document, there's a lot of appendices that are in there, some in-season management, test fishing plans, other agreed to monitoring plans for the state. You'll often find our fishery controls in there that we developed through the North of Falcon process. So I wanted to make sure folks were aware that that document exists. It is available for public consumption approximately 7 to 10 days after we finalize our preseason fisheries after the second Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting in early April. Another thing, there are occasions where fisheries that are planned in the LOAF that there are deviations from those planned fisheries. Often that comes with kind of either preseason or in-season agreements based on in-season update tools. And just for folks' awareness, we do communicate throughout the fishing year and the non-fishing parts of the year with our co-managers, collaborating on all aspects of these fishery management plans and the evaluation of these fisheries. Next slide, please. So since 2018, we have seen some big changes in our marine area fisheries, particularly targeting Chinook. We updated the FRAM model that Derek talked about earlier with an updated base period of years with those coded wire tags. And through that modeling and subsequent agreement on management objectives, we noticed that the landscape was a little different than how we had been looking at it in the past. And I think one aspect of this that I wanted to get across is that not all these marine areas are the same in terms of impact on stocks of concern. Some areas like Area 7 have really high mortalities in the model on Stillaguamish. So in both the winter time period and the summer time period, those are really expensive fisheries in terms of impacts on Stillaguamish, our most limiting stock. So that is something that we take into consideration when we're trying to plan these fisheries in the preseason. Also, as we've struggled or had to shape these fisheries to meet these updated management objectives, and we knew that we had to make some tough choices on fishing opportunities, we heard from our angling public and through a number of North of Falcon processes that folks favored summer fishing opportunities directed at returning adults, as opposed to winter fisheries targeting blackmouth. As I said, there are a number of winter fisheries areas, traditional winter fisheries areas that were closed because of the lessened amount of impacts available to prosecute fisheries. I think we talked about this also that, in pink and coho seasons, there are non-retention release mortalities that are associated with those opportunities as well. The department has increased those monitoring efforts in those time periods and seasons to make sure that we're being fully accountable in our fisheries for those non-target mortalities. And again, I talked about this earlier, but really we've worked hard to balance these opportunities, to maximize catch when we can, to maximize fishing time on the water when we can, also provide for freshwater harvests, and really do it across a broad geographic area of the coast and Western Washington, and try to do that within our conservation limitations. Next slide, please. So what we have displayed here is taking the numbers that Derek and his team produce from the model, and we're looking at total Puget Sound recreational sport catch from 2014 to 2023. So I think the big takeaway that we wanted to present with this slide is if we're looking over a long period of time, the recreational catch in Puget Sound has remained relatively stable. You see that that spike there in around 2017 and 2018. And if you look at the table to the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see that that's South Puget Sound terminal run size. And really, that table there is just meant to inform a big contributing factor to that sport catch in 2017 and 2018. You'll also see that same spike in catch as we progress through the next couple of slides. But I do think it's important to note that in 2017, that South Sound hatchery run size was the second highest return since 1975. So I think it's worth noting that you know, those fish are caught all through all of our fisheries. Next slide, please. So again, taking that previous slide as overall Puget Sound sport catch, and we're breaking that down now into smaller chunks by marine area. So on the left-hand side, you're going to see the Straits and San Juan Islands. So that's marine areas 5 in blue, 6 in red, and 7 in green. And on the right-hand side, you're going to see marine areas 8 in blue, 9 in red, and 12 in green. So back to the left-hand slide, I think, you know, it obviously shows the big reductions that we've taken to the Area 7 opportunities in the recent years, maybe a small uptick in Area 6, and maybe a small downturn in Area 5. On the right-hand side, I think we would say, you know, those Area 12 catches are relatively stable, and Area 9 and 8 have seen some reductions due to constraining stocks. Next slide. And finally, Mid and South Sound, with Area 10 being in blue, Area 11 being in orange, and Area 13 in gray. You can see those elevated catches in 10 and 11 in that 17-18 time period. But really, you know, we've seen some increases in catch in both 10 and 13. So I think the take-home message there is that we've seen stable catches, and kind of the notion that those we're getting less fish kind of towards the recreational fishery is discounted a little bit as far as the preseason modeling. What we're really seeing is a redistribution of those catches from the past to kind of more recent. Next slide, please. So previously we were looking at preseason catches from the model. This slide shows us postseason marine sport catches. And on the graph, the solid line indicates a combined summer and winter Chinook sport catch in Puget Sound. And the dotted line represents the Puget Sound summer fall Chinook return. The preseason catches that we talked about are really important for the planning piece of what we do each year. These postseason catches are the actual estimated catches from each fishing season. And I think what we were just trying to show here is that it's pretty clear that our recreational catches are following the fall, summer fall run size in each of these years pretty closely. Next slide, please. So a couple slides here to wrap up, and I think this has been demonstrated by Derek a little while ago, but I think we wanted to just talk through a little bit more some of the challenges that we're seeing in the data and the trends within these fisheries. So what you're seeing on the screen here is 4 different marine areas, 7 in red, 9 in green, 10 in the teal blue color, and then 11 in the purple violet color. And really what we want to represent to you is the increasing catch per day in each of these areas that we're seeing in most recent years' trends. Next slide, please. And really just talking through some of that, I think we have seen these elevated trends of increasing effort and catchability in a lot of our marine areas. It's also pretty apparent to us that as we've moved forward in time from, you know, the 20 teens till now, we have a pretty socially tuned in, social media tuned in fishing fleet. There's a lot of information that gets passed back and forth freely through all sorts of different social media platforms. And we know that our recreational fleet is increasingly mobile, and we'll go where the opportunities exist, when they exist. And when the bite is on, they will go and try to get their opportunity before it closes. We know that as these opportunities decrease over time, that's going to concentrate this effort, and it causes the harvest and counter levels that we have to abide by for the conservation and recovery goals. It causes those to be met sooner than we plan in those preseason processes. And that's where the in-season management comes in. The irregularity in a lot of the recent year trends makes predictability and uncertainty in what we're trying to do in any given year that much harder. I can't get out of here with kind of touching on some of the things that Dr. Litz talked about. Climate change is going to continue, and we're going to have to make sure that we're capturing the effects of climate change in our decision-making processes, not just on salmon, but the other species that are adjacent to salmon. And I think really the biggest take-home message here for everybody is as frustrating as fisheries closures and restrictive management is, these are listed populations. They have been listed since 1999, and we are not making meaningful recovery. Fisheries will continue to be limited until we start to see improvement in these areas. So with that, I think we're going to bring a slide up to go through what's ahead here for our North of Falcon planning process. Not sure if I'm supposed to walk through it on here, but I'm happy to. Upcoming, we talked about in the end of February, we'll start off with Willapa Grace Harbor salmon forecast meeting. That's a virtual meeting. On Friday, March 1st, we're going to have our forecast kickoff. That's going to be a hybrid meeting. We're going to do that from the OB building across from the Natural Resources building in Olympia. Times to be determined, but it'll probably be 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. The first Pacific Fisheries Management Council meeting will be in Fresno this year, for those interested. That'll be in early March, and that's where we set ocean salmon fishing alternatives for Chinook and Coho. Our first public North of Falcon meeting will be Wednesday, March 13th, again, back at the OB2 building across from the Natural Resources building in Olympia. It will be a hybrid meeting as well. We'll have a first recreational fisheries discussion with a Zoom meeting on Tuesday, March 19th. We'll have those ocean fishing levels and be able to start center in on what the constraints to our fishing opportunities are for Puget Sound this year. On March 21st, there'll be a public meeting around Columbia River fisheries. That will be a hybrid meeting as well and in person at the Ridgefield office. Again, second meeting in the same week for recreational fisheries, another Zoom meeting on Thursday, March 21st in the evening. Wednesday, March 27th, the next week, we'll have another North of Falcon 2 meeting. This will be in Linwood, Washington at the Linwood Embassy Suites. We will host that meeting. It will also be a hybrid meeting. Again, we will talk about fishery alternatives and planning for the upcoming season. March 28th will bring us to the Willapa and Grace Harbor Fisheries meeting. The second and final Pacific Fisheries Management Council meeting will be in Seattle this year at the Westin from April 6th to the 11th. And then we'll have a final proposed fisheries for Willapa and Grace Harbor shortly following the PFMC meeting on April 16th, which is a Tuesday. All this information is available on our website, and we will have any additional meeting and preseason info available there as you make your way through the preseason process. Again, thanks everybody for being here tonight. And I think I'm going to hand it back to Nate to head over to the Q&A portion of our evening.